Welcome to Study Hall, and specifically our segment, Bills on the Hill. Today, we're doing a deep dive into something really big. Something that could affect almost every part of your life. Imagine like a single giant rule book for the whole country. A massive proposed law that touches on everything from the food you eat to how electricity gets to your home, to who can get help with college, and even how our country keeps its borders safe. That's what we're talking about today.
Yeah.
A truly enormous document known as H.R. 1.
Yeah, people sometimes call it the big, beautiful bill, kind of playfully.
Exactly.
And it really is sprawling. I mean, incredibly wide-reaching as a proposed law. Our mission here at Study Hall, well, it's to be your expert guides, right?
Right.
Helping you cut through all the tricky legal language, the complex details. We're here to pull out the most important bits of information, maybe some surprising insights too.
Yeah, we want to help you understand what's actually inside this massive bill, why it matters to you, and, what kinds of big changes it could bring if it actually became law.
Okay, so what's our specific mission for today's deep dive?
Good question. We're taking a peek inside H.R. 1 by exploring excerpts from its different titles. Think of these titles like chapters in a really, really long textbook.
Okay, chapters.
But instead of maybe boring facts, each chapter focuses on a specific area of how our government operates and, maybe most importantly for you, how it impacts your daily life, your future, your community, all that stuff.
Got it. So we'll break down complicated ideas, make them super understandable. We'll share some surprising facts, things you might not have known.
And really encourage you to think critically, How do these kinds of laws affect all of us? Big cities, small towns, farms, factories, everyone.
All right, so put on your thinking caps. Let's unpack this bill piece by piece.
Okay, let's kick things off with something super important. I mean, very close to home for all of us. How our government helps support our communities.
Right.
Especially when it comes to things like food, farms, families. This part of the bill is in what's called Title I of H.R. 1. And it's full of interesting details about programs you might have actually heard of.
That's right. Yeah. One of the first things we find in Title I, specifically in some of its opening sections, are updates to government food assistance programs.
Like SNAP-EP.
Exactly. The most well-known one is probably the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP. A lot of people might know it by its old name, food stamps.
SNBP. Okay. So this bill proposes some pretty specific adjustments to how the government figures out what it calls the Thrifty Food Plan. Can you break that down? Like, what is the Thrifty Food Plan?
Yeah, good question. Imagine the government creates a basic grocery list, not for fancy meals, right?
Right.
But for a healthy, affordable diet for a family. That's basically the Thrifty Food Plan. It's the government's estimate of how much it costs to buy nutritious food for different family sizes. And this bill wants to adjust how those costs are calculated. For example, it sets new ratios for how much a smaller household gets compared to a bigger one.
Ratio.
Yeah, like if a 4-person household gets a certain maximum amount, this bill says a 1-person household gets, say, 30% of that. A 7-person household, they'd get 158%. It's all based on percentages of that 4-person baseline.
Huh. So it's trying to make sure the amount of help matches the actual needs of different family sizes.
Okay.
Better than just a flat rate, I guess.
Exactly.
And I see it's not just a flat rate across the board, right? The bill mentions specific cost adjustments, too, like for Hawaii.
Yeah.
And cities versus rural areas.
Exactly. Yes, this is really important because it acknowledges that the cost of living, and especially food costs, can change a lot depending on where you live.
Yeah.
Food prices in a big city are often totally different from those in a small town, or like you said, Hawaii versus the mainland. These local adjustments try to make the help more realistic for families, wherever they happen to be.
Okay, so the government's making this grocery list, figuring out costs. Why is it so important for them to be really accurate about how much food costs? I mean, how might these adjustments actually impact the real-life budgets of families getting SNAP?
Well, it's vital to be accurate because it directly affects how much food a family can actually buy. Think of it like this. If your parents give you money for lunch and they guess based on like a really cheap sandwich, but you actually need a full meal to feel full and energized.
Yeah, you'd be short.
You'd be short. Same idea here. If the government's calculation for the Thrifty Food Plan is too low, families might really struggle to afford enough healthy food for the whole month.
That makes sense.
And that can impact their health, their energy, how well kids do in school. all sorts of things.
Hmm.
So, by making these calculations more precise, the bill aims to ensure that the assistance actually covers the real cost of a basic healthy diet.
Which could mean fewer families go hungry, maybe better nutrition for kids.
Exactly. Better health in communities overall. It's really about making the program work better for real people on the ground.
Got it. The bill also gets into the rules about SNP work requirements and who's eligible. It mentions proposing some new exceptions.
Yes, it does. Currently, some SNL recipients might have to meet work requirements. But this bill proposes new exceptions for individuals who are under 18 or over 65,
Okay.
which means those age groups wouldn't have to meet those specific work requirements to get SNAP benefits. And there's also a part that talks about alien SNAP eligibility,
Which means?
which just refers to the specific rules about whether non-citizens are eligible to receive these benefits.
Ah, okay. That's always a complex area, isn't it? Balancing support with other policy goals. How do rules about work and eligibility try to find that balance? You're helping people in need versus encouraging self-sufficiency. Feels like a constant push and pull.
You're absolutely right. There's definitely a constant policy discussion around this. On one side, you have work requirements. They're often put in place to encourage people to become self-sufficient, right? To see public assistance as temporary help, not a permanent thing. The idea is it's a bridge to get back on your feet. But then, on the other side, creating exceptions for groups like young people, the elderly, or those with serious health issues that acknowledges that not everyone can work
Right.
and their basic needs still need to be met. So policies like these are always trying to find that sweet spot, ensuring there's a safety net for vulnerable people while also encouraging workforce participation where it's possible.
The bill also mentions something called administrative cost sharing. What's that about?
Think of it like this. Running a huge program like SNAP costs money, right?
Sure.
There are costs for processing applications, managing the benefits, helping people use the program, all that back-end stuff. Administrative cost sharing is just about how the federal government divides up those running costs with the individual states.
Ah, okay. So it's about who pays for running the program.
Yeah.
DC versus the state.
Exactly, how that cost is split. And this bill likely makes some changes to how much the federal government chips in for those state-level operational expenses.
Okay, so from helping families eat, let's shift to keeping our farms strong. Title I also talks about bolstering agriculture, specifically commodity supports and insurance. What are reference prices for crops?
Okay, reference prices. They're like a guaranteed minimum value for certain crops. Think corn, wheat, soybeans, the big ones.
A minimum value.
Yeah, essentially a price floor or a benchmark that the government sets. These are super important for farmers because, let's face it, farming is risky.
Definitely.
Weather's unpredictable, market prices for crops can swing wildly up and down. So this bill sets the reference price for corn at, say, $3.70 a bushel, wheat at $5.50. These aren't the prices farmers sell for,
Okay,
but they're a kind of safety net number.
a safety net. So why does the government set these prices? How do these benchmarks help farmers plan and manage their businesses, especially with all that unpredictability?
You hit the key word, safety net. The
Yeah.
government sets these prices mainly to protect farmers from huge drops in market prices. Maybe there's a bumper crop and too much supply, or some other economic factor tanks the price.
Right.
If the market price falls below this reference price,
Yeah.
farmers can get payments to help make up some of that difference, and that stability is huge for them.
I bet.
It lets them make long-term plans, invest in new equipment, decide what to plant next year, without worrying that one bad market swing will just wipe them out.
That probably helps them get loans, too.
Absolutely. Banks are much happier to lend to a business with a more predictable income stream. So ultimately, by keeping farms stable, it helps make sure we, as a country, always have enough food.
And it mentions two key programs, price loss coverage and agriculture risk coverage. You called it an insurance policy for farmers.
It really is like insurance. Think of price loss coverage, or PLC. That kicks in if the market price for their crop drops below that specific reference price we just talked about.
Okay.
Agriculture risk coverage, or ARC, is a bit different. It helps if the overall income from their crop, either for their specific farm or maybe for their whole county, falls below a certain historical average.
Yeah.
And the bill says for the 2025 crop year, farmers would get whichever payment is higher from these two programs.
Oh, wow. So a pretty good safety net then.
A pretty strong one, yeah.
Yeah.
This kind of support is incredibly important for ensuring a stable, secure food supply for all of us. It helps farmers manage those financial risks. Bad weather, pests, price swings that might otherwise make them stop farming or switch crops.
The bill also mentions federal crop insurance, other coverage options,
Right.
and something sweet. It talks about modernizing beet sugar allotments, pushing the date back to 2031.
Yeah.
What's the deal with beet sugar allotments? Why extend that?
Yeah, that is pretty specific. Beet sugar allotments are basically limits on how much sugar beet farmers can produce.
Limits. Why limit sugar?
It's a way the government manages the domestic sugar supply. It helps keep prices stable and protects U.S. sugar producers from big swings in global sugar prices, which can be really volatile.
Okay.
So extending this system out to 2031 gives those beet sugar farmers and processors a lot of long-term certainty. They know the rules of the game for years to come.
Which helps them plan investments, decide how much to plant.
Exactly. And it helps ensure we have a steady supply of sugar made here in the U.S.
Okay. Now, Title I also includes other things beyond just food and farms, like agricultural and environmental initiatives. It mentions a National Education and Obesity Prevention Grant Program. That sounds like public health in a farm bill.
It definitely does. This program would likely give out grants, money for projects aimed at teaching people about healthy eating and preventing obesity. So it shows this bill is thinking broader than just food production.
Right, connecting agriculture to public well-being.
Exactly.
And then forestry rescissions. It says the bill rescinds or takes back some money previously set aside for forestry programs. What could that mean, taking back funds?
Yeah, to rescind funds means to cancel or take back money that was approved but hasn't actually been spent yet.
Okay.
Imagine your school budgeted money for new library books, but then the roof starts leaking badly. They might rescind the book money to fix the roof instead.
Got it. So what happens if forestry money gets rescinded?
Well, it could mean less money for things like keeping forests healthy, preventing wildfires, maybe programs for sustainable logging. It depends on exactly which programs lose funding and how much, but yeah, it could impact the environment and maybe the timber industry too.
But it does extend funding for something called the Feral Swine Eradication and Control Pilot Program.
Yeah.
$105 million through 2031.
Oh, yeah. Feral swine wild pigs, they cause huge amounts of damage to crops, property, natural habitats. So continuing funding to control them is pretty practical.
Makes sense.
And it also continues funding for the Organic Production and Market Data Initiative supporting organic farming.
Which is growing.
Definitely growing. And funding for the Emergency Citrus Disease Research and Development Trust Fund is extended too. That's crucial for places like Florida and California dealing with diseases that can wipe out orange crops.
So very specific investments to tackle particular agricultural challenges.
Absolutely. Very targeted efforts.
All right, let's zoom out now. From the dinner table maybe to something even bigger. How our country keeps us safe.
Okay, big picture.
Yeah, moving from communities to national security. A big chunk of H.R. 1, mainly in Title II, but also some other spots, focuses on protecting the nation. Let's start with investments in our military and national defense.
Right. This section of the bill, across several parts, sets aside really large amounts of money. We call these appropriations.
Appropriations, got it.
And they're aimed at improving various parts of our military and defense capabilities. A significant portion focuses on improving the quality of life for military personnel.
Like housing, support services.
Exactly. Better housing, support for families, things that make life better for service members. Because it's not just about the hardware, right?
Yeah, definitely about the people. And the bill also puts a big emphasis on speeding up training and manufacturing. I see hundreds of millions for defense manufacturing training and boosting U.S. production.
That's a major theme. The bill aims to make sure we can produce more of our own defense equipment and parts right here in the U.S.
So we don't rely on other countries.
Precisely. So we don't have to rely too much on others. For example, it sets aside money for turbine generators, which are key parts for Navy ships. It allocates a lot for additive manufacturing.
That's like super advanced 3D printing, right? For metal parts.
You got it. Super advanced 3D printing. And money for new ways to build ships faster. There's even a big chunk specifically for U.S.-made steel for shipbuilding.
Okay, so why is that so important? Producing our own materials, developing these advanced techniques, why not just buy cheaper stuff from elsewhere sometimes?
That's a great question. It really boils down to national security and something called strategic autonomy.
Strategic autonomy.
Yeah, basically self-reliance. Imagine if your school needed new computers, but the only country making them suddenly became unfriendly.
You'd be stuck.
You'd be stuck. Relying on our own production means we have a reliable supply of critical parts, especially if there's a conflict or a global crisis that messes up international shipping.
Makes sense.
It also protects sensitive designs and information, keeps that know-how here, helps innovation, creates jobs here. It just makes the nation stronger and safer overall.
And speaking of advanced, the bill sets aside some truly massive amounts for advanced weaponry. Billions for a hypersonic testbed program. That sounds incredibly fast.
Oh, it is. Hypersonic means many times the speed of sound.
Wow. And billions for space-based and boost phase intercept capabilities.
Yeah.
Like missile defense in space.
Exactly. Those are definitely cutting-edge investments. Developing hypersonic weapons, which are super fast and hard to track.
Hard to stop.
Very hard to stop. And building missile defense systems in space to detect and maybe intercept enemy missiles really early, like right after they launch.
So intercepting them before they get close.
That's the idea. Beyond that, there's substantial funding for other military missile defense systems, for developing a nuclear-armed sea-launched cruise missile, and for upgrading our submarine missile systems. These are huge investments in strategic defense.
What are the strategic reasons for these kinds of investments? I mean, how might these new technologies impact global security?
Well, these investments serve several big strategic goals. Developing hypersonic weapons, for instance, is about making sure our country stays ahead technologically.
Like deterrence.
Exactly. Deterring potential adversaries, like having the best shield and sword, so to speak. Space-based defense systems are about protecting our satellites and giving us early warning against threats from anywhere.
Okay.
These innovations can make our defense stronger, which ideally makes the world safer by discouraging attacks. But it's also true that when one country develops really advanced military tech,
Other countries might feel they need to catch up.
precisely, it can sometimes lead to what's called an arms race, where countries constantly try to outdo each other. And that can shift the balance of power and impact global security in really complex ways.
Beyond new tech, there's also a lot of money for depot modernization.
Yeah.
Billions for Army, Navy, Air Force depots. What are military depots? Why is fixing them up so important?
Military depots are like giant, super specialized repair shops.
Okay.
The ultimate garage for tanks, planes, ships, all the high-tech gear. It's where military equipment gets maintained, repaired, completely overhauled, even upgraded with new stuff.
So keeping the existing stuff working.
Exactly. Investing heavily in modernizing them is super important because it ensures our existing equipment stays in good working order, lasts longer, and can be fixed or deployed quickly when needed. Without modern depots, even the best weapons eventually break down. So this investment directly keeps our military ready and capable.
Okay, shifting gears slightly, but still under the protecting our nation umbrella. Homeland Security and border operations. Here's a quick overview of the Department of Homeland Security, DHS. What's its role?
Sure. DHS was created after 9/11 to better coordinate our security efforts here at home. It's a huge department, lots of different parts.
Oh,
Well, you've got U.S. Customs and Border Protection, CBP. They secure the borders, check goods coming in. Then there's U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, enforcing immigration laws inside the country. Okay. The U.S. Secret Service, they protect the president, but also investigate financial crimes. And FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, they handle big disasters like hurricanes.
Right.
All these parts work together, and their budgets add up to the overall DHS funding, covering everything from counterterrorism to cybersecurity to disaster response.
And this bill specifically puts money towards border operations. I see $1 billion for the next fiscal year. Deploying military personnel, supporting border ops, counter-narcotics.
Yeah, it's a very direct focus. The bill also includes money to boost funding for federal law enforcement training centers, making sure the personnel are well trained.
And more staff for ICE.
Yes, funds are set aside to hire more ICE enforcement personnel officers, agents, investigators. It even mentions performance, retention, and signing bonuses to attract and keep qualified people at ICE.
And for non-citizens who've committed crimes, the bill funds expedited removal, meaning they can be deported faster.
That's the idea. Sent out of the country more quickly, sometimes with fewer hearings. Plus, there are grants for state and local governments to help them locate and apprehend non-citizens who've committed crimes, and also to counter gang activity.
So strengthening enforcement at federal and local levels.
Clearly. These provisions are designed to bolster the ability of authorities to manage individuals who are in the country without authorization and have criminal records.
This brings us to an interesting perspective from an outside source, the Heritage Foundation. They wrote a paper called Biden's Open Borders and Non-Enforcement Mean Americans Play Recidivist Roulette with Criminal Aliens. What's the main point they're making there?
Well, the core argument from the Heritage Foundation's paper is their belief that current government policies have, in their view, allowed too many non-citizens with criminal records to enter or remain in the U.S.
Okay.
They claim this has led to what they call avoidable crimes, crimes they believe could have been prevented with stricter policies. That phrase, recidivist roulette, suggests they feel citizens are put at risk by individuals likely to reoffend.
And they give specific examples.
Yes, they cite a few cases. For instance, someone named Corrales Ramirez, who they say was released and later arrested as a suspect in a stabbing. Another is Jose Barra, arrested for the murder of Laken Riley, who they report was in a diversion program. The paper also mentions an unofficial estimate, reportedly from a Border Patrol source, claiming over 1.8 million known gotaways, people who evaded Border Patrol under the current administration.
Wow.
And the paper expresses concern that many released individuals will go on to reoffend. They also suggest the long backlog in asylum claims, which can take years, and the ability to get work authorization after 6 months are being exploited by some.
That's definitely a strong viewpoint. This source suggests current enforcement isn't enough. How do the proposed changes in H.R. 1, the funding, the policies, aim to address those kinds of concerns about border security and crime? And, what are the different arguments about the best way to secure borders and manage immigration? It's such a complex issue.
Well, the provisions in H.R. 1, like increasing funding for ICE, speeding up removals, giving grants to local police, they are clearly designed to strengthen enforcement. They directly respond to the types of concerns raised by Heritage by putting more resources into identifying and removing individuals seen as a risk.
Okay.
But it's really crucial to understand there are many different viewpoints on this. Some argue for a more comprehensive approach, meaning combining strong enforcement with clearer pathways for legal immigration and also addressing the root causes like poverty or violence that make people leave their home countries in the first place.
Right.
Others focus more on humanitarian concerns, advocating for smoother asylum processes, programs to help immigrants integrate. The whole debate often boils down to balancing national security, economic needs, and human rights. Different policies tend to prioritize one aspect over the others.
Okay. Switching gears again, but still under national security. Title IV of the bill talks about the Coast Guard's readiness and even space exploration. Seems like different worlds.
They are very different, but both represent vital national interests. The bill sets aside over $24 billion for the Coast Guard for the next fiscal year.
That's a lot.
It is. And it's specifically for buying new ships, aircraft, other systems, and keeping their current gear working well. This makes sure the Coast Guard can do its job, securing our waters, search and rescue, all that.
And then NASA. Special funding for Mars missions, Artemis missions, and the Moon to Mars program. $1 billion for Mars and Artemis, hundreds of millions for construction at Kennedy Space Center. Wow. From protecting coasts to exploring the cosmos. How do these different investments reflect our national priorities?
They really show a multifaceted strategy, right? Tackling important goals from many angles. The Coast Guard funding highlights maritime security, protecting waterways, trade, disaster response essential for a nation with so much coastline. The big investment in NASA, especially for Mars and Artemis returning humans to the moon, then hopefully Mars signals a strong commitment to scientific discovery, being a world leader in tech.
And maybe future resources in space.
Potentially, yeah. These are long-term, ambitious, risky projects with huge potential payoffs. They often spin off amazing new inventions in other fields too, materials, robotics, and they inspire future generations in science and engineering. So it's about global leadership, not just in defense, but in science and exploration too. #3, modernizing infrastructure and managing resources.
That's right. Let's shift gears now. Let's talk about how H.R. 1 proposes to modernize our nation's infrastructure, roads, bridges, water systems, and also how it plans to manage our natural resources, like forests and energy. This takes us into Titles V and 6.
Yes. Starting with Title V, we see some really important rules about energy production, specifically from oil, gas, and coal.
Okay, like what?
Well, the bill requires the government to restart selling leases for drilling oil and gas on public land within 18 months if someone shows interest.
Restarting lease sales. And offshore.
Offshore, it mandates at least 30 lease sales in the Gulf of Mexico region unless an area is already specifically protected.
30 sales, okay.
So clearly aimed at increasing domestic oil and gas production. It also includes new rules about royalties. That's the payment companies make for resources taken from federal land, specifically for methane extracted during oil and gas operations.
Methane royalties.
Yeah. Plus, specific rules for leasing in the National Petroleum Reserve in Alaska. And significantly, it allows federal coal mining next to private land if it helps get the private coal out more economically.
So a lot geared towards getting more fossil fuels out.
Definitely designed to boost extraction.
Okay, so these rules aim to increase domestic energy. What are the potential upsides, the economic benefits, and the potential downsides, like environmental concerns, that come with expanding fossil fuel extraction?
It's always a balance, right?
It's a huge balance. Economically, producing more oil, gas, coal here can mean less reliance on other countries, which boosts energy security.
Right.
It might lead to lower energy prices for consumers at the pump, for electricity, and it creates jobs in drilling, mining-related industries. Plus, the government gets revenue from leases and royalties. Okay, those are the potential upsides. What about the concerns?
Well, the big environmental concerns are tied to climate change. Burning fossil fuels releases greenhouse gases, like CO2, which most scientists agree drive global warming and lead to more extreme weather. The extraction process itself can also damage habitats, potentially pollute water, affect local air quality, impacting wildlife and human health. So yeah, it's this constant challenge in energy policy, weighing economic benefits against environmental risks.
Definitely. Title V also touches on forests and renewable energy. I see provisions for increasing timber sales.
Yes, the bill actually mandates increases in timber sales from public lands, including national forests. It sets a specific target selling at least 20 million board feet more than the previous year, each year from 2026 through 2034.
Wow, a specific target.
Yeah. And it supports longer-term timber sale contracts for the Forest Service, giving more stability to logging companies.
And for renewables, like wind and solar projects on public land, there's a new fee system.
Correct. These projects would pay an annual acreage rent based on the land they use, and also a capacity fee.
Capacity fee.
Which is basically the higher of either the acreage rent or 3.9% of the money they make from selling the electricity they generate.
Okay, so rent plus a percentage of sales. How might these fees affect wind and solar development on public lands? And what's the purpose of collecting them?
Well, these fees could potentially make it more expensive to build and operate these projects on public lands. Higher costs might slow down how quickly new projects get built.
Cool.
The goal of collecting the fees is usually a few things. 1, generate money for the agencies managing the land. 2, make sure the public gets compensated for the use of shared resources. And 3, sometimes fees help offset any environmental impacts. It's about the public getting a financial benefit from commercial use of its lands. The bill also deals with the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, the SPR, that's our emergency oil stash. It sets aside hundreds of millions for maintaining SPR facilities and for buying more petroleum to store. But importantly, it also repeals or cancels a previous rule that required the SPR to sell off some of its oil.
Cancels a sell-off mandate. That seems significant. And then $1 billion for improving water movement and storage, available until 2034. That's a long-term water investment.
A huge investment in water infrastructure, absolutely. These sections together really show a mix of resource management strategies.
How so?
Well, you see support for traditional fossil fuels and timber harvesting, but also rules and fees for renewables, big investments in water infrastructure, and managing the SPR. It reflects different approaches trying to balance energy needs, economic activity, and resource conservation.
Finally, in these titles, rescissions of environmental funding. Cutting back environmental programs.
That's right. Title VI specifically rescinds, takes back unobligated funds from several environmental initiatives. Things like Environmental Product Declaration Assistance, a program to reduce methane emissions from oil and gas systems, funding for EPA environmental reviews, and labeling for low-carbon construction materials.
So money previously allocated for these is being pulled back. And it introduces opt-in fees for environmental reviews. Companies can pay extra to get reviews done faster.
Exactly. Pay a fee to get environmental assessments done within 180 days, or the more detailed environmental impact statements within 1 year. A fast track. if you pay for it.
What do these cuts and new fee structures suggest about the bill's priorities regarding environmental regulation and climate initiatives? And how might these changes affect the pace of development versus environmental protection?
Well, they strongly suggest the bill prioritizes speeding up development and reducing what it might see as regulatory hurdles or delays.
Even if it means cutting environmental programs.
It appears so. Rescinding funds and allowing paid faster reviews indicates a desire to streamline big projects, especially in energy and construction. This could lead to quicker development, more economic activity in those sectors.
But the flip side.
The flip side, critics would argue, is potentially less thorough environmental checks, maybe increasing risks to the environment or local communities. And the opt-in fee system could create a two-tiered system, where big projects with money get faster reviews, while smaller ones wait. It represents a clear policy choice, leaning towards economic acceleration, maybe at the expense of some environmental oversight.
Okay, let's dive into one of the biggest sections of H.R. 1 now, Title 7. This is all about shaping our autonomy through tax policies and credits. It's really extensive. Let's start with changes affecting individuals and families.
Absolutely. There are some pretty significant adjustments proposed here for tax deductions. For instance, it would increase the standard deduction.
Okay, the standard deduction. That's the automatic discount most people get on their taxes, right?
Exactly. A set amount you subtract from your income before calculating tax. This bill would increase that amount substantially, like over $23,000 for single filers. And it would adjust for inflation starting in 2025, so it keeps up with rising costs over time.
A bigger automatic discount. But it also says it terminates most miscellaneous itemized deductions. What are those?
So itemized deductions are when you list out specific expenses instead of taking the standard deduction. Things like medical costs, charity donations. Miscellaneous ones were smaller, less common expenses.
Okay.
This bill gets rid of most of those smaller ones. It does keep the deduction for educator expenses, though.
Ah, good for teachers.
Yeah. So it simplifies things with a bigger standard deduction, but takes away some specific deductions for others.
The bill also looks to boost help for families through enhanced child and family credits.
Yes, this is key. The child tax credit, that's money off your taxes for each child, would be made permanent and increased to $2,200 per child.
Permanent and increased. Any catches?
One significant change. To claim this credit, the child would now need a Social Security number, an SSN.
Okay, an SSN requirement. What else for families?
It also enhances the Dependent Care Assistance Program, DCAP. That helps families with childcare costs, daycare, after-school care.
Which are super expensive.
Yeah. Tell me about it. There's also a boost to the employer-provided childcare credit, encouraging companies to offer childcare benefits. And the adoption credit gets enhanced too, and it specifically recognizes decisions by Indian tribal governments for special needs adoptions.
How do all these changes, credits, deductions directly impact family budgets? Seems like a direct financial boost.
Oh, absolutely. They can put more money directly into families' pockets. A bigger child tax credit means more cash for groceries, clothes, school stuff. Help with childcare costs, frees up money and makes it easier for parents to work.
Less financial stress, maybe.
That's the goal. Reduce the taxes families owe, put money back into household budgets. It encourages family support by making raising kids and managing expenses a bit more financially feasible.
And there are some really unique new deductions proposed for qualified tips and overtime pay. This sounds totally new.
Yes, these are quite novel, could affect a lot of workers. The bill introduces a new deduction for tips received up to $25,000.
Wow, $25K of tips deductible.
Yeah, though it phases out for higher incomes. And then there's the no tax on overtime idea, proposing a deduction for qualified overtime compensation, meaning your overtime pay wouldn't be taxed.
That's huge. What's the intended effect of making tips and overtime untaxed? How might that affect different workers, like servers or hourly workers?
Well, the main goal seems to be putting more money directly into the hands of workers who rely on tips or overtime. For tipped workers, servers, stylists, this could significantly boost their take-home pay, make their income maybe more stable.
Because tips vary so much.
Exactly. For anyone working overtime, making that extra income tax-free might encourage them to work more hours. Could be especially helpful for hourly wage earners, people in industries where overtime is common. Boost their earnings without pushing them into higher tax brackets, maybe stimulates spending. And there's another new deduction related to car loans.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, for interest paid on loans for certain passenger vehicles bought after the end of 2024. But there are rules.
Always rules.
Yeah. Loan has to be secured by the car. Cars for personal use, not a business fleet, not leased, no salvage title. And here's the kicker. The deduction only applies if the car's final assembly happened in the United States.
So encouraging people to buy cars and encouraging companies to build them here.
Seems like a two-pronged goal, yes.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting, maybe a bit unusual. The bill proposes a totally new kind of tax-exempt savings account called Trump accounts. What are these?
This is definitely distinctive. A new kind of special savings account with some very specific rules. First, limited investment choices. You can only put money into mutual funds or ETFs.
Whoa, okay, break that down. Mutual funds, ETFs, qualified index. What does that mean simply?
Good call. Okay. A mutual fund or ETF is like a basket holding lots of different investments, usually stocks. So instead of picking one company, you own tiny pieces of many companies. Spreads the risk.
Okay, a basket, got it.
And tracking a qualified index means the basket isn't picked by a person, it just follows a list, like the S&P 500 list of big U.S. companies. Buys everything on the list. Predictable, usually low fees.
Low fees are good.
Very. The bill says these funds can't use leverage borrowing money to invest, so they're safer, and must have super low annual fees under 0.1%. Really designed to be affordable.
Okay, safe, low-cost investing. How do you put money in? When can you take it out?
Contributions can only start 12 months after the bill becomes law. That's for taking money out. Generally, nothing before the account owner turns 18.
Okay.
But if the money is used for qualified expenses, which the bill would define, those withdrawals are tax-free.
Tax-free growth, tax-free withdrawal for certain things after 18. Kind of like a 529 for college, but maybe broader. Can employers put money in?
Yes, interesting part here. Employers can contribute for their employees, and it's not counted as income for the employee, tax-free benefit. And even more you need. Nonprofits or tribal governments can make general funding contributions. That money gets split up proportionally among qualified classes, like, say, all kids born in a specific U.
Huh. This is a very specific new tool.
Mm-hmm.
How does it compare to existing plans like 529s or IRAs? Who benefits most? What impact could it have?
Yeah, it's different. 529s are strictly for education. IRAs are mainly for retirement. These Trump accounts seem like a more general long-term savings tool specifically for minors. Tax-free growth, tax-free withdrawals for qualified expenses post-18.
And the super safe investment rule.
Right. The strict rule about low-fee index funds aims to protect investors, encourage simple long-term growth. Who benefits most? Probably families wanting a tax-friendly way to save for kids' futures, maybe not just college, depending on how qualified expenses get defined.
And the nonprofit contribution part.
That suggests a goal of giving a broader financial boost, maybe targeting specific groups of kids. The overall impact could encourage saving from a young age, maybe reduce future loan needs for big expenses. It seems designed to set younger generations up better financially.
Okay, moving to broader economic stuff in Title VII. Business rules. How does it change depreciation or expensing, businesses deducting the cost of equipment?
It changes how quickly businesses can deduct those costs. Normally, they deduct a bit each year as equipment loses value. That's depreciation. This bill lets them expense more upfront.
Expense meaning deduct right away.
Exactly. Deduct a bigger chunk in the first year. For most qualified property, they could deduct 40% right away. For other types, even 60%.
So lower taxes sooner for businesses that invest.
Right. Encourages them to buy new equipment, invest, grow.
What about R&D, research and development? That's crucial for innovation.
Definitely. The bill changes how companies deduct or amortize, spread out their R&D costs. It lets them choose to spread costs over at least 60 months, 5 years. And it specifically says software development counts as R&D. Gives businesses more flexibility in handling R&D taxes, making it more attractive to invest in new ideas.
The paid family and medical leave credit for employers gets tweaked, too. And a new credit for qualified production property.
Yes, and this qualified production property credit is interesting. It specifically applies to facilities defined as a spaceport.
A spaceport, like an airport for rockets.
Basically, yeah. The credit applies to facilities for making, assembling, repairing spacecraft, and launching or landing them. Very targeted incentive for the space industry.
How do these tax incentives aim to encourage domestic manufacturing and innovation, especially in new areas like space?
Well, tax incentives are powerful tools governments use to steer the economy, allowing faster deductions, offering specific credits like this. It makes it cheaper, more attractive for companies to build factories, develop advanced tech here in the U.S.
And the spaceport part.
That's a clear signal. The bill wants to boost the growing U.S. space industry. encourage high-tech manufacturing, innovation in a field becoming really important. It's using the tax code to support industries seen as critical for future growth and global competitiveness. The bill also makes opportunity zones permanent and enhances them. Those are areas where the government wants to encourage investment.
Right. Yeah, often struggling communities. How are they enhanced?
New reporting rules for the investment funds, more info on property value jobs created, and it introduces qualified rural opportunity funds, expanding the program to country areas.
So what are opportunity zones again, and how do these changes encourage investment there?
They're designated zones where investments get special tax breaks, like delaying or eliminating taxes on profits. The goal is to attract long-term money into these areas.
To create jobs, build businesses.
Exactly. Revitalize communities, making them permanent, adding rural areas, gives investors more certainty. The new reporting aims for more transparency, accountability on how the money's used and its impact.
And the low-income housing tax credit and new markets tax credit are also permanently enhanced or extended. More community development focus.
Okay, what about the excise tax on wealthy private colleges' investment income? What's an excise tax and what's changing?
An excise tax is a special tax on specific things, not income, like tax on gas or tobacco. This bill modifies an existing excise tax on the investment earnings of some very wealthy private colleges.
How does it modify it?
The big change. The tax now includes interest income from student loans the university itself makes, and also federally subsidized royalty income money from inventions partly funded by the government.
So more types of income get taxed for these schools.
Correct. Broadens the base of what they pay tax on. The bill also requires them to report tuition-paying student numbers and total enrollment.
How might this tax change affect college finances? Could it impact student costs? It could mean these wealthy institutions pay more tax. How they respond varies. They might absorb it, find other revenue, or potentially pass some cost on to students via higher tuition or fees. The reporting requirement adds transparency, maybe for future policy on affordability. Also, a rule letting lenders exclude 25% of interest earned on loans secured by rural or agricultural land, encouraging lending there.
And here's one that might grab headlines. Reducing the transfer tax for certain firearms from $200 down to $5.
Yeah, a significant reduction for applicable firearms. Important note, it specifically excludes machine guns and destructive devices.
Got it. And a break for farmers selling land with a conservation easement.
Yes. If they sell qualified farmland to a qualified farmer and protect the land with a conservation easement, they can pay the capital gains tax, tax on the profit, in 4 installments. Makes it easier financially.
Wow. This whole section really shows how powerful tax policy is. Not just collecting money, but shaping behavior, boosting industries, even influencing foreign relations. What are the biggest pros and cons of using the tax code like this?
That's a great observation. It's a constant debate. The biggest pro: tax credits and deductions can directly and quickly influence economic behavior, encourage investment, manufacturing, help families, target development. It lets government achieve policy goals without direct spending.
And the cons.
The cons are significant, too. The tax code can become incredibly complex, like a maze. Leads to loopholes, unintended consequences, confusion, paperwork. It can distort markets, favoring certain industries, which some see as unfair. And it can become a playground for lobbyists seeking special breaks. So, powerful tool, yes, but can be blunt and cause unexpected problems. Another really big part of this tax title, especially for energy credits, involves new restrictions tied to prohibited foreign entities.
Prohibited foreign entities. What does that mean? Who are they?
This is a major national security piece. The bill says companies can't get certain energy tax credits if they get material assistance from or are themselves a prohibited foreign entity, specified foreign entity, or foreign influenced entity.
Okay. Who's prohibited?
The bill is very specific. Governments of certain countries, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, are listed. Citizens or nationals of those countries, unless they're also U.S. citizens residents, and companies organized under the laws of those countries.
So making sure countries considered adversaries don't benefit from our energy tax credits. How does the bill define if they have too much control?
Yeah, it gets detailed. It defines effective control situations where a company from a prohibited country has significant power over production, energy generation, or mineral extraction through agreements. It also defines foreign influenced entities based on things like ownership stakes, power to appoint leaders, holding debt. It tries to cover all angles to prevent foreign influence.
How might these restrictions affect where companies get their energy parts or where they build projects? And what are the national security implications?
These restrictions are clearly designed to push U.S. companies to source parts and build projects either here in the U.S. or in friendly allied countries.
By making it financially painful not to.
Exactly. No tax credits if you work with these prohibited entities. That's a strong financial incentive to avoid those partnerships or supply chains. It would likely cause a big shift, pushing manufacturing and supply chains towards the U.S. and its allies.
And the national security angle.
The goal is to reduce economic leverage or potential espionage risks from adversarial nations. Ensure the U.S. controls its critical energy infrastructure and tech. Prevent sensitive technologies from benefiting those foreign entities. It's about protecting economic and strategic interests.
All right, let's shift now to Title XIBA of H.R. 1. This dives into some really major areas in health and human services. Big focus on Medicaid and public health initiatives. This looks important and detailed.
Indeed, yeah. A major theme here seems to be making Medicaid more efficient and increasing accountability. Several key changes are outlined.
First up, I see moratoriums on new rules. It puts a temporary stop, like a timeout, until late 2034 on implementing new federal rules for streamlining Medicaid and also rules about eligibility and enrollment for Medicaid, CHIP.
CHIP is the Children's Health Insurance Program.
Right, and the Basic Health Program. What does this moratorium signal? Why pause new rules for a decade?
A moratorium is like hitting pause. It suggests the government wants to halt or maybe reconsider recent changes planned for these programs.
Why?
Could be to give states stability, let them adapt to existing rules without constant change, or it might reflect disagreement with the direction of those proposed new rules, essentially blocking them for 10 years. Keeps things as they are for a while.
Okay. The bill also says states would have to use data matching systems to verify eligibility, confirming addresses, checking against the Death Master File.
Yeah, the Death Master File is a database of deceased individuals. The goal is to prevent payments going to deceased people or providers using their identities. States would need address verification by early 2027 and provider screening against the Death Master File by early 2028.
What if someone's wrongly marked as deceased?
The bill says the state has to immediately restore their benefits if that happens. It also proposes new rules for how often states check if people are still eligible for Medicaid. These are called eligibility redeterminations, checking more regularly.
And for long-term care under Medicaid, it changes the home equity limit, how much your house can be worth.
Right. States could choose to apply a limit up to $1 million for homes not zoned for agriculture if someone needs long-term care covered by Medicaid. The bill also explicitly defines which categories of aliens, non-citizens are eligible for Medicaid. And it discusses the federal matching rate, FMAP, for emergency services for certain non-citizens. All these changes seem aimed at making Medicaid run more efficiently, ensuring the right people get help, and preventing fraud or errors.
What are some of the big challenges states face running a huge program like Medicaid?
Yeah.
And how might these changes help or maybe hinder them?
Oh, states face enormous challenges. Medicaid is massive, jointly funded federal states serving a huge, diverse, often vulnerable population. Challenges include accurately determining eligibility, preventing fraud, managing all the participating doctors and hospitals, dealing with fluctuating enrollment numbers. It's incredibly complex.
So how do these changes fit in?
The data matching requirements, checking addresses, death records are definitely designed to help states reduce improper payments, improve program integrity. But building and implementing those new systems, the processes, that can be a huge administrative and financial burden for states, especially smaller ones, could make things harder short term. And the pause on new rules gives stability, sure, but might also prevent updates something could improve the program.
Okay. Now let's talk about maybe one of the most controversial parts of this title. Provisions aimed at preventing wasteful spending and promoting personal accountability. First, a moratorium on staffing standards for long-term care facilities.
Yes, this puts a timeout on implementing any new federal rules about minimum staffing levels, how many nurses or aides must be working in nursing homes and other long-term care facilities funded by Medicare and Medicaid. So new staffing requirements are paused.
And then, a really significant, often debated provision, banning federal Medicaid payments to prohibited entities, banning payments to organizations that perform abortions.
This is indeed highly impactful and widely debated. It bans federal Medicaid payments to entities, including their affiliates and subsidiaries, that perform abortions.
Are there exceptions?
Yes, it specifies exceptions for abortions in cases of rape, incest, or if the woman's life is endangered by a physical condition caused by the pregnancy, certified by a physician. The ban applies to entities with federal and state Medicaid expenditures over $50 million in fiscal year 2023.
This is obviously a very sensitive topic. How might this affect access to healthcare services, especially in certain areas? And what are the different viewpoints on using public funds for abortion services?
Well, this could significantly impact access to a range of healthcare services, not just abortion, especially where these affected organizations are major providers.
How so?
Imagine a large clinic system. They perform abortions, but also offer lots of other essential services: birth control, STI testing, prenatal care. If they get over $50 million in Medicaid funds, they face a tough choice: stop abortions to keep Medicaid funding for everything else, or lose huge funding, potentially forcing them to cut services or close clinics.
Which would make it harder for low-income people to get care.
Exactly. It could create healthcare deserts for comprehensive care. The viewpoints are deeply divided. One side argues public money shouldn't fund abortions, often based on moral or religious beliefs about life. Taxpayer dollars shouldn't support a procedure they find objectionable.
And the other side?
The other side argues denying funds restricts access to essential reproductive health care for low-income individuals, unfairly targeting vulnerable populations. They often argue such decisions are personal between individuals and doctors, not dictated by funding rules. It's a complex mix of healthcare access, morality, and rights. The bill also changes how states use provider taxes. Those are taxes states levy on healthcare providers to help fund the state's share of Medicaid. It alters the hold harmless provision and phases in a reduction of federal matching funds for Medicaid expansion states over several years.
And it requires experimental Medicaid projects, demonstration projects, to be budget neutral, meaning they can't cost the federal government more money.
Correct. No net increase in federal spending compared to without the project. And then, a very big change, often generating lots of discussion, requiring states to establish community engagement requirements for certain Medicaid recipients.
Community engagement requirements. What would people actually have to do?
Under these proposed rules, applicable individuals getting Medicaid would need to meet certain conditions, like working at least 80 hours a month.
80 hours.
Or doing 80 hours of community service, or participating in a work program for 80 hours, or being enrolled in an educational program at least half-time. It's about requiring engagement in work, service, or education.
Are there exceptions for people who can't do those things?
Yes, absolutely. Mandatory exceptions for certain groups: people under 19, pregnant women, those deemed medically frail, very sick or disabled, or primary caregivers for a child under 6. They wouldn't have to meet these requirements.
But if someone doesn't meet the requirements and isn't exempt?
Their Medicaid application could be denied, or their existing coverage could be stopped, disenrolled. The bill includes $200 million in grants to help states implement these requirements.
What are the main arguments for and against requiring this community engagement for Medicaid recipients? And how might it affect access to health care for vulnerable people?
Arguments for these requirements often center on promoting self-sufficiency, reducing government reliance, ensuring responsible use of public resources. Supporters might say it encourages workforce participation, skill building, overall well-being, helping people move from aid to independence.
Okay. And the arguments against?
Arguments against raise big concerns about the practical impact, especially on vulnerable people. Critics argue these rules create huge administrative burdens for individuals and states. Eligible people could lose coverage due to paperwork issues or difficulty meeting hours because of childcare, transportation, unstable health.
Right. Life gets in the way.
Exactly. For vulnerable people, losing Medicaid means losing access to crucial preventive care, treatment for chronic conditions, which could lead to worse health outcomes and potentially higher costs later if they need emergency care. It's a very complex issue with potentially significant consequences. #TagDReso. Education and workforce development.
Okay, finally, let's explore how H.R. 1 and some related ideas address education and workforce development. This includes some really significant proposals for student loan reforms. Affects a lot of people.
That's right. Title 8 of the bill introduces something brand new called a Repayment Assistance Plan, or RAP, for federal student loans, among other changes.
A repayment assistance plan. How does RAP work? Sounds like it's meant to make loans more manageable.
It definitely is. RIP basically ties your monthly loan payments directly to your income. It uses your adjusted gross income, or AGI, your income after certain deductions.
Okay.
So if your AGI is below a certain level, say $30,000, your monthly payment is zero. If it's between $30K and $40, maybe it's 5% of your income above that $30K threshold, it scales up, capping at 10% for incomes over $100. There's also a $10 minimum payment if the calculation is less than that.
Wow, that sounds like a really big change. What are the implications of tying payments so directly to income?
The biggest implication is significantly reducing the risk of borrowers falling behind or defaulting, especially right after graduation or during unemployment. It creates a safety net. Payments are always affordable relative to earnings.
So, more financial stability for borrowers, less stress.
That's the idea. Allows them to focus on careers. The flip side, higher earners might pay more over the loan's life, and the government might collect less overall from lower income borrowers. The bill also limits loan forbearance. That's when you pause payments if you're struggling.
Right.
This restricts pauses to 9 months within any 24-month period for new loans after July 1st, 2027. So, no indefinite pausing encourages consistent repayment.
And making it easier to get back on track if you do default. It allows loans to be rehabilitated twice. What's rehabilitation?
Rehabilitation is like getting a second chance after defaulting. You make a certain number of on-time payments, and your loan gets back in good standing. Allowing it twice gives another opportunity. New rules also apply to consolidation loans, combining loans, restricting them to specific repayment plans. Plus, it aims to simplify existing income-based plans with automatic recertification using tax info.
So the government automatically checks your income. No more paperwork every year.
That's the goal. Should make things much easier for borrowers.
We saw a note from a source, student loan policy updates, saying, getting them all working smoothly will be a big job with lots of moving parts. What challenges might come up implementing all these complex loan changes?
Oh, that's an understatement. The federal student loan system is massive. Millions of borrowers, trillions of dollars. Any major overhaul like this, new plans, limits, auto recertification, is a monumental implementation task.
Like updating all the computer systems.
Exactly. Updating systems for every bank, every loan servicer, making sure they all communicate perfectly. There could be delays, errors, confusion for borrowers and servicers as things roll out. Ensuring data security, smooth transitions. It's a giant administrative and tech project. Not easy to get all those moving parts working together right away.
Okay. Beyond loans, the bill addresses Pell Grants and program quality. It introduces a new type, workforce Pell Grants.
This is a really significant shift. Pell Grants are typically government money for college that you don't repay. These new workforce Pell Grants are specifically for job training programs.
Job training, not degrees.
Right. Shorter programs between 150 and 600 hours of instruction. They have to lead to a recognized post-secondary credential in an in-demand industry sector or occupation. Basically, jobs employers need now. This starts July 1st, 2026.
How does creating workforce Pell Grants reflect changing ideas about higher education and job training? How might it affect vocational or technical schools?
It really shows a growing focus on vocational skills-based training as a direct path to employment, a policy shift recognizing the value of shorter, targeted programs teaching specific employer-needed skills.
So good for tech schools.
It could significantly boost enrollment and funding for vocational and technical schools, as they're set up for exactly these kinds of programs. It signals that not all post-high school education needs to be a 4-year degree. Job readiness is a key goal the government wants to support. The bill also addresses the Pell shortfall, making adjustments to ensure continued funding for traditional Pell Grants, too.
And here's another impactful one, restrictions on low-earning outcome programs. Colleges can't use federal funds, like Pell, for programs where graduates consistently earn low wages.
Yes. Low earnings are defined by comparing grad earnings to median earnings for working adults in the state or nationally. It's a major accountability measure.
Making sure federal money goes to programs that lead to good jobs.
That's the intent.
How might this policy affect colleges? Will it push them towards higher-paying fields? What are the pros and cons?
It could have a profound impact. It will likely pressure schools to evaluate their programs. They might discontinue programs that don't meet earnings goals or revamp them to better align with employer needs.
The pros.
Pros could create a stronger link between education and jobs, maybe reduce debt for degrees with low financial return, better prepare students for the job market.
And the cons.
Cons. might de-emphasize valuable fields that don't lead to high immediate earnings, arts, humanities, some social sciences, could hurt schools serving vulnerable populations or offering programs for vital but historically lower paid jobs like teaching or social work. It's a complex balance between economic utility and broader educational values.
Finally, a quick note from a source, SHRM, highlighting the debate. Congress is weighing pros, cons of calling student athletes employees. The whole discussion about whether college athletes should be treated as university employees.
Yes, this is a huge question for the future of college sports. Right now, they're mainly students receiving scholarships. If they became employees, massive impacts. Compensation, benefits, the whole financial structure of college sports, a multi-billion-dollar industry.
If they were considered employees, what would be the biggest changes for them and their schools?
For athletes, probably collective bargaining power, minimum wages, workers' comp for injuries, maybe retirement benefits. Like regular employees, it fundamentally changes the relationship from student to employee.
And for the schools?
Huge new labor costs for athletic departments could affect funding for non-revenue sports, facilities, coaching salaries. It could lead to a much more professionalized model, blurring the amateur-pro lines, potentially changing college sports as we know it. #DATRO.
Wow. Okay, what an incredible journey through the big, beautiful bill, H.R. 1. We've seen just how truly expansive this thing is.
It really covers ground.
Yeah, touching everything from food assistance to massive defense and space investments, complex tax changes, new ways to save, big shifts in healthcare, education. It really shows how connected all these different parts of government and our daily lives are.
Hopefully this deep dive has given everyone listening a much clearer picture of some really important but maybe often overlooked legislative proposals.
Yeah, like peeking behind the curtain, right? Seeing how the country is shaped.
Exactly. Seeing the intricate details, the broad strokes of policymaking that affect you, your community, everything.
So this massive bill, H.R. 1, proposes so many changes, each one sending ripples out. As you think about everything we've covered, what part of this deep dive into the big, beautiful bill stood out most to you? And why do you think that part could have the biggest impact on your community or maybe your future? It's worth thinking about, you know?
Yeah.
How do all these individual pieces fit together to create a larger vision for the country? Lots to mull over.